We're going to bring up Mr. Steve Beeman. Come on up. He's going to talk about digital age. Digital stuff. Here you go. Thank you, sir.
Nice to see you. Is this still working? I guess it is. I don't really need a mic. I can shout louder than that will pick up, but I'm not going to worry about it. I am grandly appreciative of being here, and I mean that. My life in 50 years in small business is devoted to you guys. You are the backbone of everything good in this nation, the 35 million of you who make it possible. I just thank you for your efforts and for your work and for the support you give your communities like Orland Park. Truly, without you guys, none of this exists. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. And I have devoted my life to you, and I will continue to. But I want to start with a little bit of a confession today. I was mentioning to somebody, I do these new every time. So I have notes because I thought, what can I say that I've never said before? And I started thinking about what I was talking about today. And I'm not usually a sentimental guy. That's the opposite of how most people would think of me. But last summer, I had, I'm going to call it almost a life-changing epiphany. And it was created by watching a little guy who spends almost his whole life trying to avoid being eaten by birds or being stepped on. He was a caterpillar. This is a true story. I'm sitting out in the backyard of my house, and one day I'm looking at a tree branch, and I see this little caterpillar inching along. And I sat and I watched him, and I thought, interesting. He looked like he was on a mission, right? He's on his way to a board meeting of caterpillars. And I'm watching him. And so I watched for an hour or two, and then I came back the next day, and he was still on the branch, walking somewhere. So I came out the third day because all of a sudden I'm now invested in this guy like a stock. I want to know what he's going to do, right? So I come out the third day, and he's gone. And I thought, well, too bad. He was a good friend for a couple of days. The next day I came out, or a week later, whatever it was, there is a pod that has developed, a chrysalis. And I have a purpose for telling you this, by the way, that there was a chrysalis. And I looked at that and I thought, wow, cool. So I watched that for about 3 weeks, and it just stayed as it was. And at the end of 3-4 weeks, I start to see it crack open. And out of this chrysalis comes the ugliest bug you have ever seen in your life. I mean, it's a bug with a bad costume. It just doesn't work. But he comes out, this was in a span of about 8 hours one day. He comes out, and what was this hideous, ugly little bug starts to flap his wings and get his wings exposed. And the sunlight hit, and there is a beautiful monarch butterfly. And I thought, wow, in our life, we simplify that transition, right? We think caterpillar, chrysalis, butterfly. But here's the difference. For that guy's life, that chrysalis time, he is not just reformed into a butterfly, he is completely destroyed and rebuilt. They're liquefied in there. They become something they never were. And it just, as I sat there, I thought, my gosh, that's us. And the reason it's us is this. The world in which we have lived the last 1,000 years is changing before our very eyes. And we feel it. It's uncomfortable. It's uncertain. It's all of this stuff. We don't know at the end of this transition if we're going to be a beautiful butterfly or we're going to be some ugly creature that nobody's ever seen. And that's the purpose of this discussion today, is to talk about whether or not this digital world that we're all living through and creating is going to be a beautiful butterfly or an ugly creation right out of Ray Bradbury's 1984. So with that said, I want to again thank you for coming today. It is the day before Thanksgiving, and I thank you for coming out at a time that we live in such incredible transition. We live in turmoil most of the time, whether you watch political news or you watch economic news or geopolitical news. There's very little that's the same. We hear talks out of the people like a Musk saying we're going to replace so many people in the workforce. We feel it, we see layoffs, we live in an economy, and I've been in the economics world for 40 years. We live in an economy today where everybody spins it one way or the other. It's either bad or it's good, depending who you listen to, right? But we, the people going through this, have an unset feeling that something's just changing. And what I would suggest to you is what's changing is a transition into a fully digital economy. So what I'm about today is I'm going to give you what I think are 10 keys to this hinge point in the economy. And I'm not here to talk about like the next tech. I could do that all day if you want to. But I want to give you a framework through which you can view things to say, I understand this transition and I can tolerate it and profit from it. Because it's hitting us everywhere. I was telling a story earlier. When you talk about the effect of this digitalization of our economy, it's no different than the longshoremen strike last summer. All of you remember the longshoremen went on strike. And typical of most strikes, they wanted more money, and that's okay, fine. But right below that was a negotiation for the companies to eliminate and refuse to adapt and adopt technology. The longshoremen were worried about being put out of work. And for a long time now, I've been talking about this transition, and the best story that hits you in the gut is we are no more than 5 years away from 6 million truck drivers being out of work. We just don't need them. So the question is that going to be as bad as it seems? Or is there a way to look at it and say, that's just a transition like we've had so many times in our history? I believe, and this is my opinion, but I believe it's a transition just like we've seen so many times in history, and it doesn't have to be bad. But we have to understand it. And we have to understand this transitional thing from what I've called industrial capitalism into, you can call it digital capitalism, or sometimes I call it idea capitalism. And this isn't a new thought. I gave this talk originally in 2010. So 15 years ago, I was talking to a group of about 500 economists, and I was explaining to them that industrial capitalism worked for several hundred years. But it's not going to work going forward because it doesn't matter anymore. And this new world of idea capitalism or digital capitalism will fully replace all of the systems, the structures, and the value systems we've built over the last 200 years. That's the challenge that we face. Because for most of this recorded history, value has been defined by assets, mines, mills, commodities, whatever they are. That's just not true anymore. Value is defined by code, by communities, by intangible things that are much bigger, much faster. I mean, we now live in a world where a college kid sitting in their dorm can come up with code for a new app, and before you know it, they're worth $1 billion. So that creates all kinds of opportunity, but it creates all kinds of dislocations too. So today we're going to talk about all of these, because in this digital economy, when you think about scaling a business, for example, in the old days, we had to go to the bank and we had to raise capital or private investors, and we had to build a factory, we had to build something. Now, you just need a piece of code, you copy and paste. I don't want to spend time talking about the stuff I'm doing, but I'll give you this because it's, I think, tangentially related. I'm going to talk later about Web 4, which you don't hear a lot of talk about. We're kind of in the Web 3 world, but I think Web 4 is there. And Web 4 is the integrated space that we will all deal in the next 3 to 5 years. The key to that is the scalability. Because to give everybody a website in the old days was custom. You had to go in and custom build a website. All of this stuff now is cut and paste. So you can take that kind of digital technology and convert it to 30 million people overnight. And that's the advantage of the digital space. But I'm going to start it with this. That again, I'm looking at my slides here. I'm not here to talk tech, and I'll get into this real quick. I don't want to give you the latest in tech jargon. If you'd like to hear it, I can. But I will digress for a minute, because I told somebody earlier, I've never been afraid of tech. I wrote a book in 1980 called Computers Made Simple. I've been in this game a long time. normally I just take it with a grain of salt. Oh, a little AI here, a little AI there, a little grok over here. You know, it's going to be fun. First time ever I saw a report that, I won't say it scared me, but it raises my level of discomfort. Has anybody in here ever watched Star Trek The Borg? The scary thing about this, it's about a civilization that's machine people, and they've integrated machines, and they're all interconnected. About a month ago, a guy left OpenAI, and if you know OpenAI, they're the people who have ChatGPT. He left there because he came up with a breakthrough in technology. His breakthrough allows AI to communicate with AI from different locations, geolocated. So if you have an AI robot in Thailand and an AI robot in Orland Park, if you teach this robot something, that robot knows it immediately. It's fully interconnected. That's a little concerning to me. You can't stop it, but that gives an awful lot of power to AI that has never existed before, and that's a month ago. So I'll talk more about that, but I want to really reinforce this idea that your capital going forward won't be as much your ability to raise money, but your ability to come up with ideas. Because technology will allow you to execute your ideas with no cost. And we'll talk about examples of that. Because I think that's the optimistic side, is we now have a world of devolved interest in which you really have this distributed technology that creates an unbelievably decentralized power structure. And it's here now, and we're going to feel it more. But let me talk about the kind of what I think of as the potentiality of this thing. Because we are moving from machines, as I've been saying, into minds. It's true now that your greatest asset is that 6 inches between your ears, right? It always has been. But more than ever now, if you can think it, you can create it. I can turn you on to developers who build app for you on spec. Funny example, I wanted to build a website. And if you go to stevebeeman.com, you'll see a website. The only thing about that website that's interesting is nobody built it. It was built fully, 100% by ChatGPT. It wrote all the code. There's a chatbot in there. That chatbot was written in Python by ChatGPT, custom for me. It knows all my background, it knows all my history, it knows everything I've written. So that chatbot is fully schooled in Steve Beeman's way of thinking. That's where all of this idea capitalism flows. But I'm going to move forward a little bit if I get, I want to talk about this one. So, 2010, I'm out giving a speech, again, to the AMZ groups and people like that, and I said, we're heading toward the 10-10-10 economy. And they're all like, you mean 10% work, 10% play, 10% and I said, no. This is a world in which 10% of the people own the assets, and these numbers, by the way, they're not right. The principle's right. It's not going to be 10-10-10. It's going to be 2, 8, 12, who knows. Nobody can predict with accuracy that kind of number. But conceptually, go with me on this. You're going to have 10% of the people who own assets. These are going to be the big players, the Googles, the Facebooks, the Microsofts, and they're going to own the technology. You're then going to have 10% of the people who innovate on that technology. These are the app companies, the platform builders, the idea people. And then you're going to have another 10%ish who operate. And these are the strategic planners, the business operators, and all of that. That segment below it will be completely dislocated. Now, you could argue it's not 70%, it's 30. Does that really matter? We are approaching within our lifetimes an economic model in which more than half the people have no value within the current institutional structures that we have. Now, a couple of key points. I said they have no value within the current institutional structures we have. I think they have more value in the independent world, where they're empowered by technology in a decentralized world to be successful on their own thoughts. in order to get there, we have to change our mindsets. Like, I grew up in a world that was pretty simple. You go to college, you get a job, you stay with the company, you put some money away, you retire, and you die. The world today doesn't work like that, and the Gen Alpha people see it. They expect to get education from every source out there. They expect to exist in the gig economy. They expect their time to be unconstrained. They don't work 8 to 5, they work whenever they want to work. They want their money to be directly related to the benefit and the value that they offer. That's a mindset change. But all of us who are in the older areas, we have to guide our children and our grandchildren to understand that. And to understand that learning is no longer about reading a book and regurgitating back what you read. That's chat. You can do that with a large language model, or especially when they migrate to the large reasoning models. What education must become is one about critical thinking. How we use these tools and how we use these technologies. Again, I'm going to give a quick story here just because I think it's relevant. If you look at companies today, when they use technology, their thought is immediately, how do we increase productivity, increase profits, and decrease cost? Let's fire people. I would suggest to you that that is an old way of looking at technology. I think the new model is going to say, we can replace the manual component of the labor, but how do we use the people's knowledge base to build better systems? I go back to the truck drivers. We're not going to lose 6 million truck drivers. We're going to lose a lot of them, but a lot of them that remain will be systems operators. And they'll run the trucks as a system operator, not a physical truck driver. If we think about how to use people for their skills as business leaders, and don't just look at it as a cost cut and raise profits in the short term, the business long term will begin to generate more creative ideas, more ways to make money. And using this technology to do it. I'll give you a really good example. A friend of mine builds the thermoses. I don't use these things. My wife has hundreds of them. But you know the steel thermoses you got? Yetis or whatever? This guy builds those. And I was having breakfast with him, and this was 2 years ago. And we were talking about AI and Grok and all this stuff, and he knows I'm real big on it. And I said, hey, I want you to do me a favor. Do you have a product in mind? He said, as a matter of fact, I do. I have a product that I've been looking to build. And I said, well, I want you to go, and here's my login to all this stuff, because I have all the paid versions of it all. And I gave it to him, and I said, I want you to tell chat what you want to build. So he did. He called me 2 days later and said, Steve, you just replaced half my workforce. It gave him back the specs of the product's inputs to the product, the delivering companies for the product, the scheduling for it. Go down the list. But when I talked with him, I said, look, instead of thinking about replacing your people, retool them. Teach them these technologies. Let's use them to expand your horizons, not contract your horizons. And that's the way we have to begin looking at it, because in this digital economy, it's going to happen. Now, as I've said, power is decentralizing. And this is why when you start to feel a political dislocation in our country, and you could watch MSNBC or Fox, whoever you watch, it's just uncontrolled chaos, right? It's largely, I'll say, because the institutions that have run things for the last 200 years are breaking down. Because we are building communities locally within people with whom we agree. We're building the control systems in local communities. As you go down through this whole idea of power, a really good example is you don't need a publisher anymore. You can do that on your own. You don't need a radio station to have a public voice. I mean, kids on TikTok have more followers than any of the big broadcast channels. The power structures that we've had are being dismantled in front of our eyes. And that's part of the discomfort we have, because we've grown up with these, and these are the way it is. There's something in psychology called a continuity bias, and it's interesting because it teaches that what happened yesterday will happen tomorrow. The sun will come up tomorrow because it always has come up in the past. We look in our lives at continuity bias. It's always been that way. I'm telling you, this time it's not. You're no more than 5 years away. I'll bet this. 5 years away from having a personal robot housekeeper. I had a discussion with our landscapers recently because I think I'm 5 years away from having robotic landscaping. What does that do to his employees? We just fire them? Do we just say we don't need you anymore? And if we do that, what do we say to those people? I say we empower them. We teach them to use their strengths and their abilities to build their own value proposition. It's entrepreneurship on steroids. And that's, again, why I support the chambers and I support the organizations that are out trying to teach this stuff, because if we can build that entrepreneurial mindset using these technologies, then the future becomes the monarch butterfly. The 10-10-10 thing doesn't become dystopian. It becomes opportunistic. So as power decentralizes through the blockchain, through tokenization, through all of these connected technologies, the disruption will become more visible. But if you're aware of it ahead of time and you can think through, how do I use this disruption to my customer's advantage? We were talking about sales earlier, and I was telling somebody, I wrote a book called The Sales Warrior, and it's because I've spent my life in sales, and I know when you're out selling something, the last thing you should do is sell. The first thing you should do is get to know your customer. What's their pain point? What's their value proposition? We're moving into a world where that's what will matter, period. Individual value. What do people think? What do they feel? How do you communicate with them? It's why social media has exploded. Now, we're going to learn how to handle social media so it's not as toxic as it is today. But that is a model for how things from a business standpoint have to be handled going forward. All of you know this, right? You all do webinars, you all do podcasts, because if you don't, you should, right? We all have something to say, and if you do a podcast, your customers will find value in that, and you can have your customers on your podcasts. Makes them feel good, makes them want to buy from you. But getting from that into something near and dear to my heart is this idea of finance. As I said, I started as a stockbroker in the early 1980s. Anybody remembers that? I worked for E.F. Hutton, so when E.F. Hutton talked, people listened, until E.F. Hutton got caught check-kiting and went out of business. Nobody listened anymore. But finance, as we've known it, is gone. I was in Texas 4 years ago, and I made a very controversial statement that got me a lot of blowback. I said in front of this large group of investors that there's no need for the New York Stock Exchange and there's no need for a bank. And they were like, whoa, how can you say that? The New York Stock Exchange is declining as we speak. When I was back in the 90s involved heavily, it had 8,000 companies in the stock exchange, or 7. Now it's got 2,200. Fewer and fewer companies want to go public. There are a whole lot of reasons for that. But the point is, we're replacing that with new types of organizations. There's something that you'll hear a lot about in the next few years called a DAO. It's a distributed autonomous organization. A DAO is a computerized stock exchange, in effect. So if you're wanting to raise money for a small business, you're not going to go do a Reg D offering that's regulated by the SEC. You're going to go create a DAO and get people who believe in your mission to participate in that DAO. And I'll give you a specific example of how they're used. There's a group in Thailand, it might have been Jakarta. I'll think about who, but the point is this: there were 3 or 4 farmers, and they couldn't afford a combine individually. So they created a DAO, and each bought a percentage of that combine, and using smart contracts through the blockchain, set up the control systems so that they could share the use of that combine for the benefit of that group. You're going to see more and more of this. Again, you have LLCs, you have corporations, you got sole proprietorships. You're going to see these DAOs come up a lot more. Somebody was mentioning earlier cybersecurity and cyber fraud. You can get into that a lot. Properly used, the blockchain eliminates all that. I was in Colorado talking about voting safety, and I think it should all be done on the blockchain. I think it just works. But anyway, the point is on the DAOs. A good example of this is Uber. Most of us have used Uber, right? You know, they really have no management. It's a computer. It takes all the feedback from the customers and all the feedback from the drivers, and through algorithms decides how to allocate the resources of that business. That's where we're headed. They've now shown that an AI brain can outthink 98% of corporate CEOs. That's not scary if we bring it down to a decentralized power. It means you can have the power of McKinsey on your fingertips. That's the strength of this stuff. So if you're running a small business and you're thinking about how do I go forward in this digital age, you've got a strategist right on your computer. They can tell you, that can tell you how, what you do, how you set up a blockchain, how you set up these structures and systems to build your company into a new age. But on the financial side, I go down to this fundamental truth. In my life, value has been defined largely by hard assets. There was always some intangible property, a trademark, something like that. But most of it was plant and equipment and land and all the hard assets. That day's dead. You're going to start seeing office buildings owned in DAOs because it gives total liquidity to the office building. You're going to see more and more people working from home, which eliminates the value of that office building. And all of the hard assets we used to put high value on are going to transition into mathematical code. But that means your ideas are the capital. That to me is exciting because you can brainstorm with your computer. Here's my problem, how do we fix it? And it will come back and give you ideas. And to me, again, that's fun. But it does tell me that to those who adapt to this, they'll prosper. To those who don't, when I wrote my book in 1980, it was all based on don't be left behind. This time around, if you don't adapt this stuff, you will be left behind. And in a bad, ugly way. So I'm going to keep going on this because, again, I could go all day. We talk about detachment from work, and I was talking about Generation Alpha. They've given up on the 8 to 5. They don't have that anymore. They don't need it. They work. How many people in here have a cell phone? Right? Okay, stupid question, because we all do, right? So tomorrow's Thanksgiving. How many of us will get an email? I could be on Christmas Eve at church, and I'm going to get an email. Work never stops. So we have to learn new personal controls and boundaries to put on these things, right? But the new generations coming up don't have time constraints. They don't have geographic constraints. And forgive my bias, you guys watched the chaos that happened in downtown Chicago? Ken Griffin, who had Citadel, I won't say he's a friend, he's a deep acquaintance of mine. He moved his company out of Chicago because he was scared. I don't bring that up except to say this. If you run a business, why would you have an office building? Why not let people work from home if they can? And that touches on, and I'm going to jump here to what I call Web 4. Web 1 was when you built your website. It's a brochure, right? We all had those in the early 2000s. It's kind of fun because you could showcase your products. Web 2 created Amazon. I can have bi-link or bi-entry conversations with that website. Web 3, which became really promoted 4 years ago, is the concept of the metaverse. Because it's a world in which you work in the computer, not at the computer. I would argue, and I wrote an article about why that failed, and I could go into that, but I would suggest to you that we are entering the world of Web 4. And I don't think I'm coining that term, I think others talk about it. But it's not something we think about, because Web 4 is the fully integrated technology of the metaverse, AI, blockchain, and tokenization. And let me give you specifics on that. How many people in here sell a service or a product to a business? All of us, right? Okay. What I would propose to you is that within a very short period of time, on your website, there's going to be an icon. And it's going to say, enter my digital space. You're going to click on it, It's going to go to your metaverse, your metaverse, your metaverse. Each company will have its own digital twin. When you walk out the back door to any of our individual locations, we will be on a street that contains everybody else in our zip code, everybody else in our community. So you literally can walk from building to building to building, going into the different businesses. And you can transact business like that using tokens. And this is one of the biggest revolutions that will change the way banking is done and everything else. Take a world in which you go in through your computer into a cyber world. You're an avatar, but most of us have used avatars. We're not that uncomfortable with them anymore. But you can go to the florist shop, or you can go to the candy seller, or you can go to the whatever. And you can buy their services, instead of for currency, a token. Think of it as a very advanced barter system. That token goes to them, which you two determine its value, right? No third party, it's the two of you determining its value. They can then take that token and buy it, spend it with somebody else. So you build circulation of these tokens within this little cyber economy. Here's the fun part. In order to convert a dollar to a token, you go in and you go to an ATM and you say, I want 10,000 tokens for my $10,000. You now go spend those and you do business and you end up with 100,000 tokens. When you cash out, it's capital gains, it's not income tax. All of the transactions you did in the little cyber world are invisible. Nobody knows they're there. Anybody here from the government? I empathize with you guys because government can't manage forward. It always manages in the rearview mirror. And this tokenization of the economy cannot be managed. Because if government says, we're outlawing Bitcoin, it competes with the dollar, we're outlawing it. In a nanosecond, there'll be another one. If they go into a cyber world and say, this is an economy, I want to tax it, it'll be shut down and a new one will be started the next day. That's the world that we're going to be in within the next 5 years. I already know of technologies being built to provide that to you right now. And I know that deeply because I'm the one doing it. So with all that, I do want to talk about the new inequalities because we talk a lot about income inequality in this time and all that stuff. This is real, but the income inequality is going to get magnified. We're going to have a bifurcated economy. There's no way around this. The middle class is going to be gone as we know it. Because there's no reason for the middle class that existed. It's gone. What you're going to have is that owner thing up here, and down here is you're going to have the creative people making tons of money because they can sell to the big guys. And people who aren't creative, who don't have that kind of thought, are just going to be left behind. And again, we could talk again all day about the economic model that presents. Here's an interesting question for you. In California, they raised the minimum wage to $20, whatever it was. McDonald's, the franchisees, went out and said, we're going to replace all of our workers with robots. They've kind of done it. It's pretty much feasible now in a McDonald's in California. You'll see one operator managing all of the smart carts and robots to get the burgers out the window. Okay, so you have one person where there used to be 10. Here's my question, and I don't know the answer to this. Where do you get the customers? Henry Ford created the middle class when he said, I will pay my employees enough money to buy my product. So they walked out of their job at Ford Motor and they had the cash to buy their own car. What happens when we don't need that? And we're there. This is not, 10 years from now. This is there now. This is dislocation on the highest order. So it leads me to a next thing of community re-engineering. And the whole idea here is a human-centered economy. We need to build the communities in the digital age where we stand up for one another. And it can be through an avatar, I don't care. But it's the idea of a community that's established to help itself. Orland Park becomes its own community. But instead of having 400 members to the chamber, everyone in Orland Park is a member of that community. That human-centered nature of the digital economy, because of the decentralized power of it and the post-financial side, the next generation of decentralized finance, make it possible for us to provide for those who can't provide for themselves more quickly and much easier than we do now without any friction. So as much as it seems like it can be disruptive to those who don't have, it actually isn't. It's the opposite. It's empowering to them. Because the friction in the system that really does cost all the money will be eliminated. And that's where I am here. As I look at this stuff, and again, I'm as involved in AI as anybody will ever be. The thing that I come down to on it, it leads to a principle here, or the ninth anchor, if you will, and that's principles. Because we need to take our human value and put it into these technologies. The technologies we have, if you're really heavy using chat, which a lot of people do, you can have full conversations with it, right? It understands morality, but it's a simplistic morality. It's if this, then this. We as humans have an innate spark. It's empathy. It's all of the stuff that makes us human. Computers are 100 years away from that. We need to be building into our systems empathy. And what I mean by that is if you're using chat and you're thinking of replacing people with that technology, or robotics, especially as it comes online, use the human side of your empathy to say, how am I affecting that other person? Can I retool that person, like that little worm that converted to a butterfly? Can I retool that person into something that adds value to themselves, value to my organization, to my community, and therefore we can all win? Because it is in fact possible. But in that whole area of the digital economy, we need to continue to think about bringing in ethics and human ethics, because the notion of right and wrong is not ingrained in cyberspace. It's ingrained in us. To some people, it comes out of a deep faith in Scripture. To others, it comes out of a philosophy of life. But we all, as human beings, share a belief in right and wrong. We need to make sure when we're looking at technology, and especially robotics and AI together, that we can say, okay, this is an application for that I can either hurt people, or this is a way that I can help people. And if we open our minds and expand our horizons to realize that we define this stuff, it's not defined for us, we define it. That we can build those systems and those structures in our environments, in our communities, to offer value to the people. So if we, again, I already kind of went through that. This is a key one, and I want people to understand the future of decentralized finance, of distributed power, of decentralization across the board isn't written in just code, it's written in character. And that means that we have to bring to these tools, when you use ChatGPT, if you write a book using Scribbler or any other thing, you need to make sure that it wrote the book that thematically matches your ethics. Because they'll write one, but is it going to be what you really wanted to say, what you had in your heart? Oftentimes it's not. It's why, as you'll notice, I haven't read a lot of this. I'm just talking with you. A lot of the stuff that I get, whether I write it or chat writes it, is still written word. It doesn't have any feeling. It doesn't have any meaning. I think this stuff is real. And I think the meaning of it is your lives are about to change in ways you've never seen. Again, banks, somebody explain to me why a bank exists. You can go to Blue Vine, they give you all the services of the banks, but they're a cyber company. They don't have a big bank on the corner. You can wire money, Zelle money, you can do all kinds of transactions. Zelle's great, right? No slippage, no friction, it just goes. You don't need a bank for that. That's the kind of massive transition that we're in for. And it's going to be there to be with us. So I want to talk about closing, in a sense, about renewable resource of hope. Because as the butterfly evolved into, or the worm evolved into the butterfly, we can evolve into something better. But in order to do it, we need to embrace these technologies as leaders, as managers and executives, to help shepherd people through the transition without fear, without abuse, and without the kind of manipulation that they're seen to do. Go look at all the deep fakes that are going on. There's all kinds of manipulation going on. You've got to be able to shepherd your charges and your community through those changes so that they don't get caught up in a dislocation and have the kind of dystopian end to this. Because yes, this digital economy disrupts. It creates opportunity, for sure. But whether it's disruptive or opportunistic is up to you. And it's up to how you embrace it. I would expect within the next 12 months, you will be approached by someone who says, I will give you your own cloud-based system for your business. In other words, a metaverse of your own. And I'm going to link that to every other metaverse in the world. And in doing that, you've become part of a digital community that can do commerce, have events, have social gatherings, all in the cloud. And that technology is here with us today. So my conviction and my challenge, I guess, would be this. We need to decide personally and collectively whether we become the monarch butterfly or something ugly. And that power exists within you, the independent business. As I said when I started, you are the backbone of everything good in this country. Without you, this whole thing comes down. The magic of the American dream is the entrepreneur. That's what made our country great. It's not politics, it's not race, it's not ethnicity. It's a shared idea that I can live on my own being and I can live with my own ideas and my own capabilities. You all represent that. So as we go through Thanksgiving, I have an awful lot to be thankful for, but my number one thing on the list is you. Because were it not for you, the world would be a very different world. So I thank you for that, and I wish you a very happy Thanksgiving, and I'll be happy to take any questions.